Hey everybody, and welcome back to Cityscape Brewing. I'm Dennis, and today we're going to be brewing up a sour, but in a different way than you're used to seeing on my channel. If you've followed me for a while, you've seen a bunch of kettle sour videos, and that's typically how I make awesome sours, including sours that have got second place best of show in some competitions. But it's always taken a couple of days to do that type of process because for kettle souring, you need to sour overnight. However, in the past couple of years, there's been a lot of different yeasts that have come out that really can cut down on those brew days. Specifically for this sour, we're gonna be doing a Key Lime Pie sour. And we're gonna go through all of that and the yeast that's gonna cut down on our brew day process. After you guys hit that like and subscribe button, grab yourself a beer, and we're gonna get after it. Also, if you really wanna be awesome, hit that join button below and become a channel member. You'll get my brew day sheets, exclusive recipes, and you get to see my videos early as they drop. So hit that join button and become awesome. In the past, it always took a couple of days to do a kettle sour because you had to do your typical mash day, and then you had to let it sour overnight sitting in a kettle or in a different vessel at a little bit warmer temperatures to get that Lactobacillus plantarum in order to sour your beer overnight. So it took an extra step or an extra day in your brew day process. However, recently in the last couple of years, they've come out with some really awesome yeasts. One of the more common ones that you've probably heard about is Philly Sour. We're not going to be using that one, but the same company that makes Philly Sour also makes a yeast called Sourvisiae. And Sourvisiae is a yeast that will actually sour a little bit more than Philly Sour. One of the reasons I have not used Philly Sour is it tends to be a little less sour, a little less tart than I would like in my beer. And the reason is because I like a little bit more of a tart flavor in my sours, and especially if I'm adding fruit, that's gonna help balance out the sweetness of those fruits and still keep it sour. I've also found that Philly Sour kind of has a green apple-ish taste to it. And so for the Sourvisiae, this yeast sours the beer a lot more. And so it could get down to even a 3.1 range, which is actually a little more sour than I would like it. So to combat that, we're gonna be also adding a packet of US-05 the next day. So Philly Sour and Sourvisiae create lactic acid as part of fermentation process. And so you don't need to do the kettle souring process because that sourness comes along with fermentation. So it's kind of two birds, one stone type of deal, right? But to help it so it doesn't get quite as sour as we'd like it to, we're gonna be pitching the Sourvisiae yeast first, which will be after our brew day today. And then we're gonna be pitching a packet of US-05 tomorrow, about 24 hours later. So this should help keep it in that perfect range of about 3.5, or so we hope. So we'll find out. All right. Future Dennis here with a little bit of a spoiler alert. This didn't go quite as well as I wanted it to, so I ended up making two batches. One with a raspberry sour with 6 pounds of raspberries, and I used the Sourvisiae yeast just a little bit differently and actually kind of more in a simple way. So make sure you watch to the end so you can see exactly how I did it and how I suggest you do it for the next time. But first, we're gonna get our grains milled up. I've got my water in here. We're doing a 13-pound batch with white wheat and Pilsner. So I've added about 8.5 gallons of water into my kettle here. I've added my salt additions, and we're gonna go ahead and start heating up this water and milling our grains. Also, shout out to Clawhammer Supply, which is what the system we're going to be using today for this kettle sour process. It makes it really easy and convenient when everything is all done in this brew in a bag system. I'll have a link in the video description where you can check out their systems for yourself. So we've set this to 152, which is our desired mash temperature. We're going to go ahead and get our grains milled up. We're also going to be adding a whole sleeve of graham crackers to get that key lime crust in there as well. There are some sugars that are fermentable in here, but I didn't add them to my grain bill. We're just gonna go ahead and crush this sleeve up and hope for the best. All right, as this thing is getting really close to our mash temperature, what I like to do is actually shut off the heat source. So we're gonna shut off the heat, right at or just before 152 degrees. So I'm gonna do that because the heat element is actually still warm at the bottom, and this will likely heat up a little bit more than our desired temperature, which is fine because we're gonna be adding cooler grains. And the idea is that this will cool this down and will be really, really close to our target temperature. And then once we get everything mixed in, we'll turn that heat source back on to keep it at that consistent 152. For now, we're gonna go ahead and mash in with our grains and our graham crackers. Now that we got everything mashed in, we're gonna go ahead and start recirculating with the pump. This will allow all those sugars to get off of the grains and recirculate and keep that mash temperature consistent too. So we'll put that on. And we're gonna restart the heat on our system. And we'll let this go for 60 minutes, stirring occasionally, lifting up that lid and stirring around in the basket. All right, while our mash is doing its thing for an hour, we got some work to do because for a key lime pie, well, you need limes. And this is a gose, so we're also gonna be adding some kosher salt. So specifically, I'm gonna grate up about 6 of these key limes. They're really, really small. We're gonna grate these things up so we just get the zest on the outside of these limes, and we're gonna add those towards the end of the boil. If we think it needs a little bit more lime flavor, we can also add some of these in secondary fermentation, along with some lime juice if we want to. You can also add Motueka hops, which are a lime flavored hop, to the boil if you'd like to. I don't have any on hand right now, but I've used them before and it works perfectly to add a little bit of lime kick along with some hoppy characteristics to your beer. In this particular case, I'm just gonna go with the lime flavor from the zest. And then we're also gonna measure out about 5 grams of kosher salt in order to add it towards the end of the boil. I'm also gonna be adding about 1/2 pound of lactose to give it that kind of creamier mouthfeel, thicker mouthfeel, but I don't wanna go overboard with that, so I'm not gonna do a whole pound. You could also add that at the end of the boil, that's also just fine. I just don't have any on hand today, so I'll pick that up before I get to secondary fermentation. Along with that, I'm also gonna be adding some vanilla beans, about 2 of them chopped up. You're gonna chop them up real small, put them in a little tincture of vodka. You could also use whipped vodka if you wanted to in order to make that more of a creamier vanilla flavor as well. And we'll add that in there. That's gonna kind of round off that key lime pie flavor that we're really going for. All right, so it's been an hour or so since we started our mash. It's been recirculating. We've made sure we stirred that a few times throughout, and now we're ready to pull our grains. And so what we're gonna end up doing is shutting off our pump and our heat for right now. And I'm gonna go ahead and shut off the valve that's on the front so it doesn't continue to pull wort out of the spigot at the bottom. Then we're gonna go ahead and take off the lid. And we're gonna use our pulley system here, which is also available at Clawhammer, to pull this up. The grain basket with 13 pounds of grain in it is fairly heavy. I'm gonna let this hang and drain for a good while though, to let all that sweet wort get out of the basket into our kettle, so we're not really missing anything. But we'll let that kind of drain out. The next step is getting to our boil, and I'm gonna show you a little tip and trick on how to regulate the heat on our controller. We're starting to see some bubbling activity, so I'm gonna go ahead and add some firm cap S that will help prevent boilovers as we get into the boil. You can see that the temperature says it's only 203, but it's starting to boil in there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go in and press my AM button. You're gonna see this upside down A. We turn that up to 60, and then we turn back on our heating element. So now you'll see that there is a nice steady rolling boil happening in the kettle. And if we need to, we'll turn that down slightly in order to keep it between 55 and 60, just so we can have that consistent, ready, steady boil. All right, we got about 10 minutes left in the boil or so. I'm gonna be adding our hop spider into there. We haven't added any hops and we're not going to, but this is what we're gonna use to add the lime zest that we did earlier. And also at this time, we're gonna be adding a little bit of yeast nutrient to help with healthy fermentation. All right, we're now at the end of the boil, so we're gonna go ahead and kill our heat, and we're gonna put in our lime zest and our kosher salt. After we give this a good stir up, we're gonna go ahead and start recirculating and cooling down our wort. All right, once you take a reading with your thermometer and see what the temperature is of this coming out, this is now under 80 degrees. So I'm okay with transferring this now right into the fermenter. So we're gonna go ahead and shut our pump off. And then we're gonna put this hose directly into our fermenter and start filling it up. All right, we have that all in the fermentation chamber, cooling down the last couple of degrees before we can pitch our Sourvisiae yeast. And we're gonna leave that for about, again, 24 hours, let it kind of do its thing, start building up that lactic acid in there. And then tomorrow we're gonna come back and we're gonna be pitching the USO5 after about 24 hours. So we're hopefully at that sweet spot of about 3.5 pH after fermentation completes. All right, guys, after fermentation finished, we went ahead and transferred this to a secondary where I added the vanilla bean and some lactose in order to give it a little bit of that creamier mouthfeel. And so if you haven't used vanilla beans or whole vanilla beans before, make sure that you're slicing them longwise along the bean themselves and then scrape out that inside. That's gonna give you a lot of the flavors and things that we were trying to expose to the beer. And then I chop up the vanilla bean skin as small as I can and put it in a small amount of vodka. By doing that, you're making yourself a little bit of a vanilla tincture to be able to then put into a paint strainer bag and put in your secondary. For the lactose, I used a little bit of water, probably about a cup or so. I heated that up and then I mixed in the lactose a little bit at a time and racked the beer on top of both the lactose and the vanilla beans. Then we let that sit for a little while to soak up those vanilla beans, probably about another 7 days or so, but you can do a few days less if you wanted to. And then I racked it to a keg. As I was racking it to the keg, I took a final hydrometer reading and I realized the hydrometer readings were way off on both my tilt and my hydrometer. And the reason is because the lactic acid that is produced by the Sourvisiae yeast actually kind of messes with the hydrometer reading. The lactic acid has a higher than normal measurement, and so it was looking like my final gravity was somewhere around 1.020 because it created a lot of lactic acid. And so really the final gravity was probably closer to like 1010 or under, because there wasn't really a tool online that told me what that difference should be, because they don't really know how much lactic acid is really in there. I did taste it at that time and it was actually really delicious, but it was warm and uncarbonated. It wasn't too sour at that time, or so I thought. But I'll go through all of that after I pour a glass, and we'll go through all of the tasting, aroma, and what I would do differently next time. I give you the Key Lime Pie Gose. The first thing that I noticed is that it still retained a lot of that haze, which is what we're really looking for because we used a lot of that white wheat in the grain bill. Aroma-wise, you can definitely smell the tartness, and you can definitely smell that it's going to be sour. I think I get a little bit of those limes in there and maybe a hint of vanilla flavoring, but definitely you can tell that it is a sour, tart smell and aroma to it. Let's go in for the taste. This beer, as I kind of foreshadow a little bit in the beginning, is a little more sour than I would have wanted it. Even though we tried to take some steps to avoid that by pitching USO5 24 hours later. Because this is my first time using Sourvisiae yeast, it was a little hit or miss. I do pick up a lot of those flavors though. I do taste the vanilla, maybe even a little bit of that kind of bready graham cracker flavor in there. And some of that kind of thickness mouthfeel from the lactose actually came through. One thing that I would do differently is I would probably pitch the USO5 yeast at the same time as I pitched the Sourvisiae. And the reason is because the first 24 hours is when the Sourvisiae really takes hold and creates a lot of that lactic acid. When I put this in, after I transferred it to the keg, it was under 3. I think it was at 2.9 or something like that for the pH. And I knew at that time it was gonna be way too sour for what I was shooting for. And here is that second one. This is the raspberry sour with 6 pounds of raspberry in it. This is the one that I used with only half the pack of Sourvisiae yeast and half the pack of US-05, both at the same time. I ended up doing it this way in order to not create as much lactic acid right off the bat. I read that the Sourvisiae yeast actually creates all of the lactic acid within the first 24 hours. So by me pitching the US-05 packet a day later, I was actually letting it create all the lactic acid it could in the first 24 hours, which made it really, really sour for the Key Lime Pie version. In this version, I pitched half a packet of the Sourvisiae yeast and then also a half a packet of US-05 at the same time, and that actually made it perfectly balanced. And this is a great way of actually kind of saving yourself some money on a yeast, because now I vacuum packed both of the yeast that I had left over together, and I'll use it again in my next sour. This is very, very comparable to my kettle sour process, except for it just saves time. And this is really the award-winning recipe that I got second place best of show for my raspberry sour last year in a regional competition. It also doesn't have those appley flavors like you get with the Philly sour yeast, which is really why I like the Sourvisiae and why I was really trying to stay away from the Philly sour. So I'm actually going to stick with this method moving forward for all of my future sour videos. I may do a kettle sour once in a while, but to save time, why not pitch half a packet of each of the two yeasts and save yourself half a day of brewing? Cheers. But all in all, I think it was a great experiment and one that I hope that you can learn from so you can decide how you're going to brew your next beer. But all in all, I think this recipe itself was spot on. I think the yeast choice was great. If we tweaked it a little bit, it would be a perfect recipe. So go ahead and try it yourself. Again, I'll have all of the ingredients and everything else listed in the video description below, so you can go check all that out. Leave any comments or questions in the comment section. I really do love and appreciate everybody who comments or asks questions, because that's what this channel is all about. So hit that like and subscribe button. Happy brewing, and cheers. Hey, thanks for watching my video. You're awesome. You want to be even more awesome? Hit that join button and become a member. You'll get exclusive members-only recipes and other perks like brew day sheets, and watch my videos early as they drop before anyone else. So hit that join button below, become a member, and be awesome.